Everyone knows that we are in a state of transition, going from one kind of world to another. But is this all that we can know about it? It is usual now to speak of the New Age or the Aquarian Age, which is simply an astrological interpretation of the cycles through which mankind passes. I have come to the conclusion that there is a certain reality in the influence of the general configuration of the solar system on the history of the Earth. But there are also other factors to consider that are of a different order, possibly of a higher order, because, after all, the influences of the configuration of the planets are still within this existing world. The way I look at it is that there has been a combination of influencing factors, part of which are predetermined by forces within the solar system, and part of which depend upon higher influences from beyond the solar system. I am strengthened in this belief by what I know about man. We people also have two kinds of influences that determine the shape of our lives. One is connected with the influences under which we were conceived and born, our hereditary, which determine the pattern of life that is open to us. We call it fate, and everyone knows how many things do come out in accordance with the pattern that is determined by competent astrologers. But there is also something else that is quite different in us, that is not determined in this way, that is outside the influences of the solar system: our destiny. Our destiny is what we are intended to find, if necessary, even to the extent of struggling against our own fate. There are certain forces that will inevitably bring about changes in the conditions of life on this earth, but they're not wholly imposed on us, because there is also a higher destiny of mankind that depends upon whether or not we are able to respond to influences that are outside of the material world, outside of the solar system. Some such picture as this that I have formed in the course of many years of study of these things may seem to you to be saying very little, because some people venture to say very much more on this about the pattern of the world. I'm only saying what I have seen from my studies, and from a lifetime of experience of these things, and from perhaps certain intuitive perceptions. But all of these together, and every kind of interpretation, points to the same conclusion, which is that we are now entering a new cycle in the life of mankind, and there is nothing really more important for any of us than to try to understand what this means. People feel very optimistic when they think that we're passing into the Aquarian Age because of the various kinds of favorable influences they associate with it. But they overlook that there are also influences which are quite threatening, connected with the very same configuration, and it is not at all certain that the Aquarian pattern of itself will assure a favorable future to mankind. No, one must look more deeply behind this. The greater influences connected with the destiny of man on this earth, these work in very great cycles. After all, man has lived on this earth a very long time, compared with which the astrological cycles of 2,000 or 3,000 years are hardly anything at all. And there have been very great changes in human life. Not only changes in the environment and in the races of men, but even in the very species. If we look back over the history of the world, and strangely enough, we can now reconstruct the history of the world for the past 30, 40, or even 50,000 years, with decreasing precision, of course, as we go back, but still with clearly defined landmarks, owing to new methods of dating and to the discovery of more and more of the traces left of earlier cultures. And we can see that there has been not just a steady change running through the life of mankind, but two very different things, two very different trends, and these are both very instructive for us. One of these trends is that of accelerated change. This accelerated change, or accelerated evolution, has been a law ever since life has been on this earth. In the great changes, from the non-living to the primitive living states, from the living states to the cellular states, from those to the primitive plants and animals, and so all the way through until the mammals were reached, and then man, and so on. Every stage has taken far shorter time than the preceding stage. So things are going faster and faster. Until now the movement is very rapid indeed. So rapid that profound changes take place in the life of man and the life of this planet itself, not only of the human race, but of the whole planet, within a single lifetime. Whereas the planet 100 years ago was comfortably able to absorb all human activity without any observable trace of damage to it, now human activity is visibly damaging. This is a very enormous change. What we were doing on this earth as recently as 100 years ago was quite tolerable for this planet. That is the extraordinary thing, that in such a short space of time there should have been such a very great change. This has to be taken into account, that we are living at the moment in a situation when the changes in the life of this planet are so rapid that it cannot continue as it is without there being a complete breakdown. It is generally accepted and recognized that in some way or other this acceleration of change will have to stop. Until quite recently this question didn't even arise, but now it has got to be taken into account. Any thoughts that we have about the future must take into account that we are in a period of not merely rapid but accelerated change. We can only predict one of two things: either total disaster or a change in the law under which the development of this planet is going. In other words, this acceleration must stop. It is like a plane in a nosedive. Only two things can happen to a plane in a nosedive. Either it has to be pulled out of it, or it will be smashed to pieces. This is the first thing that history teaches us. The other is the certainty that there are also cycles, that things have not gone uniformly, that there have been periods of very rapid change, followed by periods of stagnation, followed by periods of renewal. These cycles have been superimposed upon the general accelerating process, just as the waves of the sea are superimposed upon the movement of the tide. We see the rise and fall of the waves, and we see the rising of the tide, and we know that at some moment the tide must cease to rise, because its momentum will have been exhausted. In the same way, in the life of man, we see this rising of the tide of activity on the surface of this planet, and something has got to change. But all the same, one has to take account, because we are so small and our lives so short, of the cycles. In other words, we are like children playing by the shore, for whom the waves are very important. It is very frightening when a wave sweeps over you. These waves are like the short cycles of life. They last perhaps 2,000 years, but there are greater waves. And there is something like that from time to time the waves are greater. That is, the cycles are not the ordinary cycles of rise and fall of civilizations and cultures, but something greater in the life of man. The last very great change in the life of man occurred at the end of the ice ages, about 10,000 years ago, when the whole condition of life on this earth was profoundly changed. A very great part of the traces of earlier culture was wiped out. Some kinds of catastrophes, which we have no means yet of reconstructing, must have occurred, because earlier cultures left much greater traces. So we have many more traces of what happened 18 to 20, 30,000 years ago than we have of the period just preceding the end of the ice ages, when many, many animals disappeared and a great part of the human race. According to traditions, such major changes occur in long periods of time. There must be some very ancient memories that made people leave behind them this tradition or legend. If the last great change happened 10,000 years before Christ, that is 12,000 years ago, the time of the ending of the ice ages and the beginning of the great movements towards our modern languages, cultures and religions, then maybe we are due for another change equally as great in the way in which man lives on this earth. Or possibly we may be due for something that is even greater. Really, the arriving of a new race of people. We should take this seriously. We should take it seriously because it not only comes from the evidence of tradition and from the evidence that comes from the study of cycles, but simply from what our eyes see as we look about us. The world cannot last as it is. One must know and really accept that human nature is not capable of doing this unaided. We must be able to be free from the illusion that man alone can overcome the disruptive forces in his own nature. No community, that is just a human community, ever survives beyond the influence of the pressures that compel it to accept cooperation. As soon as pressure is relieved, disruption begins. This is the human law. It never, to my knowledge, fails of exemplification. Men will never accept one another unless they are under some external pressure or threat. It is only when they set their sights beyond humanity altogether, and when they accept that the very purpose of their own existence and of the community which they are trying to create and in which they are trying to live is not survival, or it is only incidentally survival. It is not human satisfaction, only incidentally human satisfaction. It is because this is what the evolution of this earth demands, and because it is demanded that the great intelligences that are directing the evolution of the earth will help communities that accept this task. This is why it is right that every community that wishes to survive should look about it and see what it can do for its environment, and not only for itself, its natural environment and its human environment. But it should also look beyond that and try to understand, and never be satisfied with what it already understands, but always try to understand more and more the purpose and meaning of life on the earth, because it is only by serving that purpose that this quality of intrinsic inner stability can be found that gives you a community that is really capable of surviving. We must really learn not to trust ourselves, not to trust anything human. We must be disillusioned, thoroughly disillusioned with man, and learn that we can only put our trust in a power higher than man. If we can do that, if some beginnings can come, then these little creatures, these little communities capable of living in the new way, will in the course of time creep out of their burrows and begin to appear on the surface of the earth. They will begin to be able to give confidence. People will see that a new form of life is possible. It will be a very, very different from what we know at present, because what I said at the beginning is also, I think, essential for this. that there should be a new perception, going beyond words, new ways of touching one another, a new sensitivity towards one another, a new awareness of what life is and what it requires of us, direct perceptions so that there is no need to be told. These are the characteristics of the new race, but these are characteristics that are also inside us, because the new race will come from us, from our children, or our children's children. It will not be an ad hoc creation on this earth. It will come from those who are capable of bearing children that have these qualities, and it will come from us if we set ourselves with real determination to serve the future and to be open in ourselves the possibility of doing so. Question: do you consider that all people at the present have this capacity to change, or this capacity for evolution, or is it a very gradual process? Answer: yes, we both have it, and it's also a very gradual process. Let us take the example of some organ which should be present, and probably will be present in the next race, which is sometimes called the third eye, the higher perception, or the formless perception. The possibility of this exists in all people, but it is mostly so vestigial that it would be very difficult to develop it, and very few would want to or think it necessary to develop these kinds of perceptions. So in fact it would be very gradual. Supposing that a fair number of people were to develop another kind of perception, and it became evident that because they had this kind of perception, they were able to understand one another quite differently from the rest of people. This would then perhaps draw many more people to ask, well, can't we do it too? It is possible to look at it like that, and maybe it could lead to more rapid change. But I still believe, even under those circumstances, that in the present state of the evolution of mankind, which is still fairly early, only a small proportion of people would develop it for a long time to come. Nothing else but ideas will change the world, but they can only do so at their own pace, when they become assimilated and people begin to think differently. What is really important is that by having that attitude firmly in ourselves, we become contagious, because just as disease is spread by contact, so also does a new point of view spread by contact. We need an epidemic, but that epidemic must be of a new attitude, picked up from people who have it. One has to look objectively. To be distressed over the state of the world and remain distressed, however distressed one may be, is simply one's own subjective state. It may even be satisfying to us to feel that we are sensitive and able to be distressed, and the rest of it. The real thing is to have objective compassion, to say, I must do something myself, that however small in its material consequences, can be very, very large in its spiritual consequences.